once again, I just have to say how proud I am to be part of this Republican conference with Senator Ort as our leader. He gets it. He always has. This conference gets it. He leads us in our fight for the people of the state of New York, regardless of the fact that we're standing opposed to the powers that be, that we're going against the status quo, in spite of the fact that it is sometimes and most often not politically correct. We don't care because we care about New Yorkers. You know, this pandemic has shown us a lot. It's exposed one of my favorite movies, Clint Eastwood, it's exposed the good, the bad, and the ugly, and too much of it has been bad. And one of the things that we've learned is that the bureaucracy that is in place to protect and to educate our students across the state of New York does not know what it's doing. It is clear that what has been exposed by this pandemic is the incompetence of the bureaucracies here in New York. If you want to understand the epic fail that New York's management of the COVID pandemic has been, look no further than what New York mandates have done to our students. You know, my father turned 87 years old yesterday. I had a long conversation with him. He lived through the aftermath of the Depression and World War II. And he was a child, a student in grammar school in New York City during World War II. And he said something very interesting to me. He said, through all that, there were no disruptions. There didn't seem to be the same kind of chaos in the schools that he's watching and he's looking in terms of his grandchildren and in the news. And that is just a sad reflection in terms of what has happened here in New York. I can report to you, I witnessed firsthand what happened in New York City. The former Chancellor there, Carranza, who to me is best known for his discriminatory policies against Asian American students. You know, the left constantly talks about the next catastrophe coming around the corner. They will have you believe that next week and every week the world is going to end. So at least you would think they would be prepared for it. When he turned off our schools and sent our kids home, there was not a single plan in place. They didn't have a mask, they didn't have sanitizers, they didn't have tablets, they didn't have a remote learning plan. They had nothing for our children. Zero. That's the bureaucracy. The state education department offered nothing to our parents, to our teachers, to our administrators, to our students. If not for the teachers on Staten Island and across this state, and the administrators, the principals and the APs, and the parents who stepped up, our children would have lost even more than they lost. What did they lose? So, baseball seasons were canceled. Basketball seasons were canceled. Proms were canceled. Drama clubs were canceled. You can go on and on, lacrosse. And you might think, well, that's all trivial, big deal sports. Well, it isn't if you're a junior in high school or a senior in high school. It's very important in your life. And then look at the education that they missed out on. Every study is now showing that our students in New York, educationally, are behind. Why? Why? Because as the leader said, mandates that didn't work. It would be one thing. We heard they were going to flatten the curve. All they did was flatten our economy and flatten our kids. It would be one thing if you shut down the economy, you closed schools, you fired teachers, you fired healthcare workers, you fired employees, you put restaurants out of business. It would be one thing if you looked after all of that and you said, but we saved lives. Look what good it did. They did all that. And they didn't save a single life. As Leader Ort said, when you look at New York's numbers, after all those mandates, after all those shutdowns, after all those students sent home, we have one of the highest death rates on planet Earth. As Senator Ort said, in terms of the mandates today, you know, I had a laugh. I was actually home. I listened at the beginning of the Omicron variant, the governor and people from the health department mentioned that it had hit New York. Ground zero for Omicron seemed to be some event, a convention in New York City, where everyone was required to be vaccinated to be there. And that was the first sort of super spreader event. I'm not blaming anybody there. You blame Omicron. But that's where it all spread. That seems to be the source in New York. If it wasn't there, it would have been somewhere else. The point is, everyone there was vaccinated. And I remember she read the statistics. I think she said something like there were 87 new cases, or the first cases, we have 87 here in New York. 85 were vaccinated, 2 weren't. So I urge you to get vaccinated. And by the way, I'm considering vaccine mandates for students in September of 2022. I mean, if it were a Saturday Night Live skit, I would think it would be a bit too much. 99% of the people who had Omicron first here in New York were vaccinated, so please go get vaccinated. And by the way, I'm going to have perpetual vaccine mandates for our students going forward. Parents are fed up. Students are fed up. We're fed up. New Yorkers are fed up. Enough is enough. Back home where I live in Staten Island, there's a vaccine mandate in our schools. There are more teachers contracting Omicron now than before the vaccine mandate. I mean, can't we be honest with each other? Look out the window. You know it's happening. Ask yourselves, how many people do you know have had Omicron in the last few weeks? How many were vaccinated? They were. I wish that wasn't the case. It is the case. Luckily, the silver lining, Omicron is not as deadly and not nearly as deadly. In fact, I saw the latest study. It's 100 times less deadly than the other variants. It's in fact less deadly than the typical flu we've been dealing with for hundreds of years. The mandates don't work. Worse than that, we've really harmed our children. We've really stolen some of their prime years from them. We've stolen the opportunity to really give them the best education that they should have had and they deserve. Perhaps nowhere more than in our healthcare system, which Senator Helmy is going to speak about, in our schools. If you want to look at how badly this administration has done, and the administration in New York City, both the health department and the education department, if you want to really try to understand the epic fail, look no further than our schools. And it is tragic, and it's got to end.